Dr. Praful Mishran, a colleague at the Deccan College, is my co-author, and I'll be presenting the paper for both of us. Our focus is going to be in this paper on dialectal variation and diffusion of change. So as I was saying, our focus in this paper is going to be on dialectal variation and diffusion of change, specifically in a periphrastic construction, a construction that we will refer to as the ULRA construction in the rest of the paper, which marks the progressive aspect in some regional varieties of Marathi, which as we know is a southern New Indo-Aryan language. Let me briefly talk about the survey, the dialect survey, which has generated the dialectal data that we're using for this study. This is a survey of dialects of the Marathi language, a joint project of the Deccan College, funded by the state government of Maharashtra. The aim of the project is to create an annotated digital database of regional and social varieties of Marathi. Until date, we have collected data in 30 of our target 34 districts, and we have speech data in the form of recordings from close to 2,500 speakers. We've used what we call the Deccan College Stimulus Kit, which includes pictures as well as 70 videos, which we're using to elicit especially morphosyntactic structures. We're also using narratives, and the entire data as well as the analysis so far is for you to see on the project website www.sdml.ac.in. I do urge you to take a look. It's still under construction, but some of the material is already uploaded on the website. So coming back to the linguistic feature which we will focus on in this presentation, the progressive aspect, which as defined by Mayer in 2012, conveys the idea that an event is progressing dynamically over a time frame opened up by an utterance. So the progressive would then be a subcategory of the imperfective aspect, which the progressive has more specific meaning, as Comrie has observed. As is well known, markers of tense and aspect, in not only in New Indo-Aryan but in languages in general, originate from auxiliarized verbs, verbs of location, verbs of posture, motion verbs. We also observe that different markers may grammaticalize the same function, and reversely, the same original form may evolve into different functional markers. So to take the example of the grammaticalized verb raha, which in modern Hindi has the meaning of progression, but in Bhojpuri, an eastern dialect of Hindi, as noted by Annie Monton, has the meaning of past reference. The progressive in Hindi, the raha construction, wo ja raha hai kind of a construction, is observed by Dev as well to be an innovation, an innovative periphrastic construction, and it does not find mention in the 19th century grammars of Hindi. This will be a significant observation moving forward. Now turning to the dialectal Marathi data, we find that to mark the progressive aspect, we observe 4 different morphological strategies are used by the dialect speakers. So these are the 4 variants. Let's look at them. Of these, the first variant, which is the participial form of the verb followed by a tense carrying auxiliary, is the variant that we find in the standard, exclusively found in the standard dialect of Marathi. Let's look at some examples now. So the first variant, the participial form followed by auxiliary, for example, he bal bolna khelat ahe. When we talk about these variants, this includes its contracted forms. So something like kaitar kartoy bagitna kartoy would also be considered as variant 1. The second morphological realization is the bare imperfective, which is the bare form like zate, deto, which is used to mark the progressive in dialects of Marathi. The third construction is the V non-finite lag plus ox construction, which in the standard dialect of Marathi has a semantic value of the inceptive. But in several dialects of Marathi, we find that the distinction between inceptive and progressive is blurred, and sentences such as घड्याळ काढून दुसऱ्या मुलग्याच्या हातात बांधायलाय would indicate an action in progression. And the fourth construction, which is going to be the focus of this paper, the ULRA construction. Examples which we have here, fool kadun raila, topi di raina, which involves the grammaticalization of the verb raha, which is to stay, which we noted also for Hindi. Now, in this slide, we see the geographical distribution of each of the four variants, the four morphological variants that we just noted. We find that the first and the second variants are used throughout the state of Maharashtra. In the entire Marathi-speaking region, these two variants are used. The third and the fourth variants are of interest. We find that the third variant, which is the inceptive used as the progressive, okay, let's keep it at that. We find that this is used extensively in southern Maharashtra, the region which is adjacent to the Dravidian language speaking area of Maharashtra, and making inroads into central Maharashtra. We also find a small pocket in Malvan and two communities, the Mahadev Kois and the Thakurs in Palghar district in the northwest here, to the north of Thane, also using the Urlag construction. The fourth variant we find, which is the Unra construction, spreads throughout the northern part of Maharashtra from the Vidarbha region up to Khandesh and over on into the northern part of Palghar district as well. So this became the point of departure for the question that we will explore in this paper, which I will come to in a couple of minutes. So of the four morphological exponents, the final construction, the periphrastic construction, Unra construction, will be the focus of our discussion from this point onwards. We note that this construction, we noted earlier that when we looked at this map, that the construction is used in northeastern Maharashtra, which is Vidarbha, as well as in northwestern Maharashtra, which is Khandesh. But for the purposes of this presentation, we are focusing only on the Nagpur area, which is the Vidarbha area. So some observations about this Unra construction in Nagpur. It is a grammaticalization of the stative verb rani, which means to stay, used as an auxiliary. The auxiliary carries PNG markers and tense marking on the auxiliary is absent in Vidarbha. We've already noted the geographical distribution, but we find that the construction is used across northern Maharashtra in the present tense. However, in the past tense, we find a different isogloss. So we find that in the present tense usage of the Unra construction already indicates a very important isogloss of northern Maharashtra vis-a-vis the rest of Maharashtra, which does not use the Unra construction. But when we look at this construction, its usage in the past tense with past time reference, we find that Vidarbha and extending up to Ahmednagar, in fact, the Nagar district, does not use the Unra construction in the past tense. These areas, which are shown in red color, would use, like the standard dialect, the participial form of the verb plus hota, so karat hota, zat hota in the past tense, but Unra in the present tense. So this becomes a second isogloss of interest. The Khandesh region, on the other hand, uses the Unra construction in past tense as well. So these observations from our dialect data led us to ask the question, is the VCP Raha, the Unra construction in the non-standard regional varieties of Marathi the result of internal evolution and convergence, or is it the result of language contact? Specifically, in the case of the Unra construction in Nagpur, is it the outcome of contact with Hindi, as has been suggested by scholars including Pandari Pandey and Varad Pandey? Pandari Pandey specifically observes that Nagpuri Marathi allows the VCP Raha construction, which is not permitted in the standard dialect, and that it is borrowed into Nagpur Marathi from standard Hindi. So this becomes a very important observation when we delve into our own dialectal data and look at some historical records. In order to address this question about the origin of the Unra construction in northeast Maharashtra, we'll use the methodological approach which is known as dialectological typology. It is an integration of dialectology, typology, and contact linguistics. It is going to help us to gauge the extent of variation and diffusion of this particular construction in Marathi. We will attempt a cross-linguistic comparison, partly of standard cross-linguistic comparison of standard languages which flank Marathi today, but more importantly, a cross-linguistic comparison of non-standard languages closer to the Nagpur area. Looking at this question that we have set for ourselves, it would have been interesting to look at, an attempt at a macro-linguistic comparison of the imperfective aspect in this subgroup of the New Indo-Aryan dialect continuum. But in the interest of time, I'll restrict myself to looking at Hindi, which is of direct importance to us for this presentation. So we find that the imperfective aspect or Hindi makes a distinction between the progressive and habitual. So for habitual, you would have the V plus ox, aata hoon, aata tha. Progressive, the V plus raha plus ox construction, as in main aa rahi hoon. And the continuous aspect also uses the grammaticalized verb ra, as in wo ghar aata raha tha. Now, recall that the scholars have proposed that standard Hindi is the origin of the Unda construction in northern Maharashtra. We take the position, or we would rather, let me begin by pointing to some differences in this construction as it is seen in standard standard Hindi, and the Nagpuri dialect of Marathi. So to begin with, the standard Hindi construction includes the gerundial form of the verb aata, aa raha hai, kha raha hai, etc. While the Nagpuri Marathi uses a conjunctive form of the main verb, khaun rahela, yaun rahela, and so on. Also, we note that in the Hindi progressive construction, the presence of the auxiliary is obligatory and it is absent. The auxiliary, tense carrying auxiliary is absent in Nagpuri Marathi progressive. And finally, we find that the raha construction, the raha construction is used both in present and past tense constructions in Hindi, but as we noted, it is absent for Nagpur Marathi in the past tense. So we have reasons to doubt whether standard Hindi is really the origin, the source of the Unda construction in northern Maharashtra. I will be showing you a map later on, but if you can visualize it, is that the Hindi-speaking state of Madhya Pradesh flanks the northern border of the Nagpur district. So we move on now, in keeping with the dialectological typological approach that we're using, a micro-linguistic comparison of non-standard speech varieties. And before we give up on the idea of Hindi being the source, we thought let us explore into other non-standard varieties of Hindi which might have had an influence. We noted that looking at the historical record, recall that by the turn of the 20th century, the raha construction had not really emerged in standard Hindi, or it had not been noted in grammars of Hindi by any count. So we look at these Western Hindi dialects which are documented in the LSI, and we find that only in Braj Bhasha and Kannauji, and Grierson in fact says that they are actually one and the same variety, but in keeping with popular sentiment, he has separated the two. But this would be today's UP, which is far removed from Nagpur district of Maharashtra, unlikely to have influenced the speech habits of Nagpur Marathi speakers. We have not been able to find any records of any known migration from the Kannauj area into northern Maharashtra. We note that the other dialects of Hindi, Western Hindi, either did not have the raha construction or had only a very minor presence, if at all. We then moved our attention, since we were using the microlinguistic approach and exploring non-standard varieties, we note that at the turn of the 20th century, this part, Nagpur and the surrounding area, the Vidarbha area, was a part of the British administrative unit called the Central Provinces. This included parts of Gwalior of today's Madhya Pradesh, as well as the Bastar district of the adjoining Chhattisgarh state in today's parlance. So we decided therefore to kind of zoom into this particular contact region and to look at whether it was the source of this Unda construction was one of the neighboring dialects. So since our interest is in Nagpur Marathi, we decided to look at these three varieties which surround Nagpur Marathi. On the one hand, we have broken Bundeli. So Grierson makes the observation that Nagpur Hindi is nothing but a broken version or a Marathi influenced version of Bundeli. So this was one variety which we decided to look at. Halbi, which is in the Bastar district of Chhattisgarh, remains. It's an extremely influential language there locally. It is a lingua franca. It was the language of the Halbas, who were attendants to the kings in Chhattisgarh at the time, or the turn of it, when the central province was an administrative unit. So Halbi was one speech variety we decided to look at. And of course, the Ahirani variety of Khandesh, which immediately lies to the immediate west of Nagpur Marathi. So looking at the historical record as we find it in the LSI, interestingly found that Nagpur Marathi recorded in the LSI. So I have to, a caveat that we cannot ignore is there are only 4 tokens of the progressive aspect in the LSI documentation. But even these 4 tokens have something of importance to tell us, we think. So we find that in Nagpur Marathi, which almost exclusively uses the Unra construction today in our dialectal data, did not have the Unra construction at all 100 years ago. So it is the participial form Marat and the ox Ahe, which was the only form attested for Nagpur Marathi in the LSI. In Khandeshi, on the other hand, recall that Khandeshi lies to the west of Nagpur Marathi, we consistently find the Raha construction in all the 4 tokens which are available in the LSI. We find the Raha construction for Khandeshi. To the east, we looked at the record for Halbi, and we find Marun Rale. Not only do we find that 2 of the 4 available tokens use the Ra, the grammaticalized verb Ra, but we also find a construction identical to the one that
we are left with only 2 wings.
Okay, sir. Which we find in Nagpur Marathi today, the Un Ra construction. Bundeli, we find only one instance of the Ra, grammaticalized verb Ra, which recall, Grierson has noted, is nothing but Nagpur Hindi. So we are concluding here by noting, by contemplating really and having looked at all this data, both the contemporary dialectal data and the historical record, what could be the possible sources of the Unra construction in Vidarbha Marathi is certainly not standard Hindi. Of the non-standard varieties of Hindi, Braj Kannauji is geographically too removed to have influenced Marathi in Vidarbha. Broken Bundeli among the non-standard varieties of Hindi may be a candidate. But let's look at the other neighbors, and we find that the widespread use of the construction in Ahirani, which has tremendous local prestige, which is preserved even today, as our fieldwork in the region shows us, an extremely prestigious variety even today, a lingua franca, might be a possible source. A second possibility we would like to consider is Halbi, which is also a prestigious lingua franca to the east of the Nagpur region. So this is absolutely the last slide. We would offer as a hypothesis for further research that not Hindi, but either Ahirani to the east or Halbi to the west of Nagpur was the source of the progressive construction. Also, we would be interested in looking at whether we are looking at a micro-linguistic area spanning northern Maharashtra, southern Madhya Pradesh, and parts of Chhattisgarh. That's for further research. These are our references. We'd like to thank the entire team of the SDML and the Rajya Marathi Vikas Sanstha who are funding this project. Thank you.
You had a question?
Yeah, please.
Congratulations on successful research. You
Thank you,
when you do further research, and it's an excellent. So I take only 1 minute. That's it. Thank you. Thank you, Sonal.
Thank you very much, sir.
Hi ma'am, it was again wonderful listening to you, and I'm really looking forward to look at that corpus that you spoke about. My question is about the reasoning that you gave for concluding that it's not a contact from Hindi, that is that construction is not found in past of Nagpuri Marathi. So I want to know for myself that when change through contact happens, does it immediately reflect in all the categories? Like if a change is happening through contact, it would first reflect in one form and then gradually move on to other forms. So do you think could it be a case of change in progress right now, which we might see later, that it might be reflected to Nagpuri Marathi past constructions as well eventually? I mean,
Okay, as far as, if I've understood your question correctly, for Nagpur Marathi, the Unra construction doesn't seem to be a change in progression. The second part of this paper, which we didn't present, the third part, in fact, is the standard variant is now undergoing is change in progress in this region. Regarding your question, you're quite right. Not all linguistic features are simultaneously affected. But we are relying on whatever historical record was available, and it is a hunch that this Unda construction has emerged somehow in the 100 years intervening, the attested, the Hindi grammars which are available to us at the turn of the 20th century and the present time. So we were looking at, the records which are available for the non-standard dialects of Hindi, which are available to us, and we find that in many of them the construction had not emerged. We do find some evidence for it in the broken Bundeli, but that of course is nothing but the local variety of Hindi. So could the Bastar variety of Halbi have been the source of that construction in Bundeli, the broken Bundeli as well, is something that it's a conjecture at the present moment.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
But later on, I know we have run out of time, but if anyone has any interesting leads, anything we are missing here, do write to us and let us know. We'll be very interested in pursuing those references.
Thank you very much for your excellent presentation.